Okay, good evening, everyone, and again, welcome to this evening's program. I'm Jim Van Epps, president of the Savannah Council on World Affairs. I'm honored to do that, and host for this evening's presentation, for this evening's program, presented by Kristin Wood, who will be more fully introduced by Ambassador Larry Silverman in just a couple minutes. Ms. Wood will be speaking on the role of open source information in U.S. national security, a topic of submergency, I believe. To begin, our sponsors for this evening are Kreitz Auto Group, and they are sustaining platinum sponsor over many years for us. They provide automotive excellence in Savannah and across the coastal empire and have been doing so for over 80 years. We're very grateful to Kreitz for their support as a continuing sponsor of the Savannah Council. We also appreciate our second sponsor for this evening's program, Planters Inn. There isn't another boutique hotel that offers the extravagant amenities, elegantly appointed rooms, and classic historic location you'll find at Planters Inn. Thank you, Planters Inn. Before I pass the podium to retired Ambassador Larry Silverman, who will introduce Kristin Wood, I'd like to show you our program scheduled for April and May, one on U.S.-Argentina relations, and then we don't have a topic yet, but the opportunity to get former U.S. Ambassador Kurt Volker. We'll take him whatever he wants to talk about. So he will be here on May 23rd, and that will conclude our programs for this year, and we'll start up again in September. I do want to say that we are continuing to make plans for moving at least part of our program to downtown, down to the Cultural Georgia Center. And a little bit more on that, as many of you who might have been with us for a while know that we used to be down there. They raised the rent they raised it by 150%. It was more than our budget could stand. A team found this venue. It's been great for us, and we really appreciate the church hosting us. And how we're going to go about doing that, we're still trying to work out. Actually, one of the things, and I've got to tell you that you'll feel a perturbation in the force here as I say this among our board members, is some of us believe that we ought to do maybe September through December here, and then downtown January through May. Why? We're trying to draw members from South Carolina as well as from the West, especially with the expectation that we are going to be growing West, particularly with the $8.2 billion Hyundai program project that's going to come in. So we would like to draw those folks in also. We do not want to lose you or anybody else that lives in the landings, but looking ahead and trying to be strategic in our planning, that's what our thinking is for right now. If you have any ideas about that, we'll be happy to listen to you, but that's what our thinking is right now, and I'd want to use the current vernacular, I want to be transparent about what our thinking is right now, okay? So, to continue our program, please welcome Ambassador Larry Silverman.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. I think you're really in for a treat on a subject. When I first heard our speaker tonight, Kristin Wood, speak on a podcast called Intelligence Matters. I think I mentioned another podcast last month that you might want to listen to from time to time. This is another one by the former Deputy Director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, and who has great interviews. And this was a great interview about a subject that I really had not been paying attention to. And I think Americans don't pay a lot of attention to, and maybe even responsible officials do not pay as much attention as they should, which is this realm of data. We all, intelligence officers, military people, State Department people, we all like to think, we have this access to this little bit of classified information and that. Well, guess what? There's a lot more information out there that is not classified and may be commercially available or otherwise. And as you know, a lot of people and a lot of entities are out there collecting a lot of information on all of you without your without your knowledge. But this is one way, hopefully you can benefit from that by elected officials and others using the full scope of information that's available, including all of this commercial information, satellite data, and others. When you think about, for example, one of the premier foreign policy tools, sanctions, I mean, how do you monitor sanctions? That's how you monitor whether there's compliance with sanctions and often not compliance with sanctions. And does it matter to the United States? Yes, because it's sanctions busting by Russia, by Iran, by China, when we're trying to limit technology or otherwise. So it's a huge field, and Kristin Wood is really, hope you don't mind this expression, one of the real gurus of this for us in the United States to call attention to this issue and to get people thinking about it. She's a 20-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency in analysis operations and digital innovation. Her last position was as deputy director of what the agency calls the Innovation and Tech Group, or Technology Group, at the open source center of the CIA. She used to, in that guise and others, she regularly briefed senior American U.S. officials on all aspects of foreign policy, challenges, and threats. She later went to the Belfer Center at the Harvard Kennedy School, and literally, as we speak, is in the midst of creating a startup company in the gaming field, actually. So all of you who want to invest later on, will you take investments later on? But we were talking at dinner. You know, some people say, "Well, gaming, it's sports, it's leisure activities." But we were talking about the nexus between gaming, for example, and education, and getting children to plug in this case, because they're going to be doing this anyway, spend time online, but to help them get over maybe some deficits in their own ways of learning, or the deficit of not having enough time in school, or a teacher not having enough time. So these are very, very important fields, and we wish her well in organizing this startup, which she will be busy with tomorrow, but and has been. But we really appreciate the fact that she has taken time out from that effort to come here and talk to you about open source, this burgeoning field of open source information, which I think will be of great interest. And lastly, she's become a convert to Savannah, for which she's visiting for the first time. Kristin Wood.
Well, I think we have to bring it down a little bit. Yeah, and actually I do have other clothes. I was like, wow, okay, I probably need to have a little more diversity. And yeah, exactly. Well, I'm just honored to be here. This is the first time I've been to Savannah, and I don't know why it hasn't been on my list before, but wow. Larry has got to be the ex officio, maybe visitors board now, because what he's explained and what I've seen has been remarkable. So really happy to be here, and just thank all of you for taking time out of your days and the loveliness that is surrounding you to be here. I'm very excited about this topic. There's so much to talk about, and so we'll hit on some topics maybe more lightly than you want. I'm aiming to speak for about 30 minutes. Questions during is fantastic, because we'll cover quite a gamut of things. So kind of my outline for tonight, I want to get through these 5 areas, a brief look at kind of the history of OSINT, or open source information. And then I want to go through how the world has changed, how it is changing, and how it will change, and the implications for that. And we could spend a lot of time talking about any of these. So we'll touch lightly on them, and then maybe afterwards we can dig into the things that you might be most interested in. So kind of the history of open source. In researching this one, I went to the Open Source Center. So I spent 20 years at CIA, and the chase was always on for having being in special programs and having extra compartments. And many of you probably had clearances at the time. And for me, I just felt like, well, that's really special. And so I didn't really value open source, and I didn't really look at the history of it until actually I was there. And I realized that it was established originally in 1941, months before Pearl Harbor, and that it was really designed, it was in the Federal Communications Commission. So looking at that, I realized, wow, it has been really one of the oldest INTs, as we call intelligence areas, more than 80 years. So it then moved. There were some interesting parts and pieces that came in 1941 before Pearl Harbor. And, like the other warnings, never quite got there in time. I hadn't realized any of that really until quite recently. And then it moved on, as so you can see here. The thing for me is the 1947, when the National Security Act really created the modern national security structure that we have now and incorporated the Open Source Center. So 20 years goes by, really very little changes, and then we're looking at expanding it to cover foreign press. And it didn't really change again for almost another 40 years. And so the open source I knew when we were briefing the vice president or the president, it was generally a comment from a foreign leader saying, supporting a U.S. policy or announcing their own, but it really wasn't ever central to what it is we produced at the CIA. It was something that was a nice to have. And that's how most of us thought about it, and most of us thought about assignments in the Open Source Center at the time as like, it's a kind of nice to have, but really it's not central to what happens. And it was really in 2005 when it was renamed the D&I Open Source Center that it pivoted quite a lot to be much more important to the larger mission. Many of you remember the Iraq WMD Commission when we're looking at how we'd gotten things so wrong with Saddam Hussein and his weapons of mass destruction, and the profound implications that had for the nation, the intelligence community, and the world. The world changed in those moments. And I think moving to incorporate more open source material was a key piece of that. And so you see here it gets the internet and databases and the geospatial data, so all of those things are the fundamentals. Became much more a part of what the Open Source Center did. It has the distinct opportunity of looking at what's happening in the world, but limited by the fact that, in a classified world, when you're operating in a place where you have what are called secure compartmented information facilities, or SCIFs, right, where you can't have access to phones and other things, it's very hard to live in the open while you're living in a classified space. So that has continued to be a challenge for open source since then. And more recently, moving it to renaming it to the Open Source Enterprise and moving it within the Director to Digital Innovation. Well, why was that important? Well, symbolically, that moves it further into the CIA, and it attached it more into the technology and innovation they're looking to create around all of the dynamism that exists in open source. So commercial data, at the time it was founded, it just didn't exist. When I would have my open source queue in the beginning, in the late 80s, it would look like, 25, 30 articles. So I could read all the press, and I could watch all the news feeds from whatever country I was following, but that's just not possible now, right? The world has changed so much. So where we are now is the digital interconnectivity that has changed so much. So we have these industrial revolutions. This is the fourth industrial revolution, and each have fundamentally changed the way the world works. And this one is about the digital interconnectivity of things. There's the Internet of Things, as many of you have heard, whether it's all the devices we have. So just smartphones are owned by 83% of the world's population, so 6 billion people. Just some facts about the internet. Google connects 5.7 million searches a day. 12 million people send iMessages. Facebook posts 44 million likes, and 6 million people shop online. And that is an old number from 21. I suspect it's triple or quadruple that by now. And this Internet of Things where it's not just my phone, but the fridge telling me I need a new filter annoyingly when I really don't need a new filter, or my car, or the measurements of crossing bridges, either on the weight of trucks or the pollution that they're emitting. And there's so many sensors like that, and an entire network of commercial entities exist that monitor all of this data. So for the longest time, the open source world was monitored by governments. And maybe academics read the same things that we did, but now the world has gotten to be so big. So I think about the world of commercial data. My last job was running a company that had 200 commercial companies' data pulled together from government all on one platform. And so it could see the scope of what was available. And these are things that I would have considered classified, like data breaches from China of the U.S. academics they're looking to partner with, or the U.S. academics that are now suddenly putting all of their patents, not in the U.S. anymore, but in China, in the evolution of creating Chinese police stations in the United States, human trafficking. So these are some profound issues, whether that's mobility or logistics or the way that we live. So much more data is available about each of us. And what do I mean by that? So what I worry about a lot on this is that we are more vulnerable than we know, and we individually, I don't know that any adversary or hacker particularly cares about me, Kristin Wood, but when you can get millions or tens of millions of people of their data from breaches of insurance companies or banks or credit unions or your auto loan, what that collectively builds is an understanding of me as a person, me as a shopper, what my intentions are. And so you have this broad understanding that our adversaries actually have about us as individuals and us as a nation. So much so that we've seen in the rise of, in 2016, in the lead up to 2016 elections, we have so many bot campaigns run by Russians and Chinese in particular, but others, really focusing on understanding, taking that data, understanding what message I need to see to be convinced of what worldview they want me to have. And so the Senate Select Intelligence Committee actually created a 1,000-page report on Russian interference in our elections. And if you read it, what you see is this pervasive understanding of how people live and operate. And so they would actually target counties in particular states. Georgia was one of them. And they would target counties that were either predominantly white, predominantly black, predominantly other Latin American cultures. And they would feed in messages that would alienate that population from others. And they would do it over and over again. And they would understand that the north side of a county voted differently than the south side of a county. So the sophistication of the effort and the way they would speak in colloquial Spanish, for example, or using the slang, if you will, of whatever that local area was, is actually really remarkable. And in fact, in Texas, the Russians, actually 2 bot campaigns, brought both sides of a Black Lives Matter protest together. Both the BLM folks and the anti-BLM folks. They were both generated out from campaigns coming from Russia. And you had Americans show up, and there was it was not a peaceful situation. It wasn't actually the Americans who were generating the angst and the drama. It was, maybe some biases that existed there, but it was brought together and brought to a head there and in so many other places by the Russian bot programs. So when we think about the influence operations that are so profoundly effective against us, many of you may have existed in the world of MAD, mutually assured destruction. Do people know what that is? Yeah. So for those who don't, it's the whole idea that we have a nuclear capability because we do not want another nation to use theirs against us. So if we have enough, the concept goes that the mutually assured destruction, they'll come after us, we come after them. I actually think that there's a whole piece of this here that we haven't responded to on these narratives that we'll get into in a minute. Intercontinental ballistic narratives, ICBMs versus Ms. And this is the way that the world is shifting. So what is different now for the national security community, which was built on secrets and the built of collection of secrets, which is still vitally important, is the world that is happening on the outside now is so much more complex and understood better by commercial actors. So if I'm at Chase, or I'm at Bank of America, or I am at Schwab, and we're going to make an investment in a multi-billion-dollar investment in another country, I need to have the best analysis possible on the economics, on the stability of the political environment, on supply chain, whatever it is the decision is. And the people who do that work are phenomenal. And they exist outside of the national security structure. So what I guess I'm saying is there's so much opportunity here for better interconnectivity between the commercial world and the world that has been the world of secrets, that we're in a moment where we need to really consider bringing more of that in. Sure. Yes.
I'm the only person here, and I apologize, but I'm not even sure what the term open source means. So could you explain that?
Sure. So it is really interesting. We've been doing it for more than 80 years, and it's still a debate. So the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, who's the person that topped the intelligence organization just in the last few weeks, issued a report which defined it. And so open source information is media. It started out as media, so newspapers, websites, television, now streaming, and that really has been traditionally open source. When I'm using it, I'm talking about that and the world of commercial data. So lots and lots of companies sell their data for whatever, for marketing purposes, to trade with someone else who can help them further their customer base, et cetera. So the world of commercial data is there as well. So does that get far enough? Yeah. And if there's any other clarifying questions, I'm sorry, I sometimes assume that, everyone's as much of a geek on this as I am, so I will apologize for that. But what we're seeing really is a totally different understanding of the world that is being driven by people on the outside. So with the Ukraine conflict, you've seen, they've talked a lot about information that's been declassified by government. But the truth is that a number of commercial and nonprofit organizations are leading our understanding of it. There is an organization out of New York called the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, that has the authoritative maps of the conflict in Ukraine. And it's a team of, I don't know, I want to say 10 or 12 Russian, Ukrainian-speaking. They were graduate students. I mean, they're a little older now, but pretty young. And they have this technical capability to understand the elevations and what it means that this side of the road is actually on the Russian side and this side is the Ukrainian. And both sides in the conflict, they publish a lot, and the Russians are one of the massive consumers of what they publish. But the Ukrainians use this, and the U.S. DoD uses this as the authoritative map as well. So I think that's just a profoundly important responsibility, kind of as emblematic of the issue. I used human trafficking here as an example too, and it's something I think we would all 100% agree is egregious and absolutely needs to stop. But understanding it is so complex. And when you talk to some of the nonprofits who actually work this, and city by city, county by county, state, nationwide, what they'll tell you is a lot of these networks are actually run by people who are of Chinese origin, and that they sit atop not only human trafficking, but bringing fentanyl into the United States, running drugs of other kinds, guns, and always the worry is this how bad actors are getting into the United States? But it's a systematic effort where we think about ourselves as a nation. The divide between what happens in one state and another doesn't necessarily communicate across state to state. But the same is true with state agencies and federal agencies. And so I think they're operating very well on the seams to be effective to really expand what they're looking to do. And I don't know, I have traveled a lot on some of the major north-south corridors, both the East Coast and the West Coast, and you see these signs everywhere that say, if you see these things, please, report it. So it's become a very pervasive problem, and it exists in so many other ways. So what we're seeing is, my point here is to say there's so many others than government that understand this well and can really contribute to the national security mission. And then I think also individuals have so much information at their disposal. Larry and I had the opportunity to talk earlier about a nonprofit run by an individual, Elliot Higgins, called Bellingcat. And if you haven't looked up Bellingcat, I would absolutely do that. They have done some of the most seminal work there is on understanding things as they're happening in real time. So many of you may remember several years ago, a Malaysian airliner was shot down over the border of Russia and Ukraine, and Bellingcat is the organization that figured out that it was actually the Russians that fired on it. And they did so by looking at the imagery, commercial imagery, and seeing trucks. And then they went across their open source community and said, what do these trucks look like? Well, these are actually trucks that are run by the Russian military, and then where did they come from? And so they saw them come down the road from a certain base. And then they saw that was actually attached to the missile unit that had been traveling with this and been put on a train. And so they were able to backtrack all the way to come up with some pretty conclusive evidence, in addition to showing the remnants of what was left of the missile, which was provided to the international court and was a big seminal reason that the Russians were blamed for that. And they do this work. They've discovered Russian spies in NATO. And by looking at flight plans, by looking at airline tickets on airlines, they discovered that a lot of the Russian illegals had the passport numbers that were sequential. And so they clearly just got a whole block. And so, that's a cheat. I'm saying it now because it's a cheat code doesn't work anymore because it's been published in a book and widely known. But they did this meticulous work. They looked at bank statements. They looked at hotel records. They looked at train records. And so they have been able to discover things that really used to be only in the purview of national security institutions like NSA, like CIA. And so I think actually when you're crowdsourcing across tens of thousands of people, it's a remarkable opportunity to quickly get to a bottom line that is very hard to do in an institutional organization. So I highlight that one just to say there's some really good things happening in it. And if you have a chance to go to Bellingcat, Bellingcat, and look at their website, there are so many other things they've done that are just remarkable. CAT, C-A-T. Yep. So you probably won't be able to see this either. Poor planning. This world, and we're talking about with the influence campaigns, has really given rise to this concept called narrative intelligence, which is understanding what our adversaries want us to believe. And there are a number of companies that do this, and I think actually at Ole Miss, they actually have a program now designed to teach students about narrative intelligence, and they would love other partners. So for any of you associated with any of the local colleges, I know they would love to partner on this. But the idea is something happens. And there's lots of things floating around in chat and opinion, and it must have been this, that, or the other. And then there's a narrative that can be created by conspiracy theorists, governments that wish us poorly, other kinds of institutions, and it has real-world effect. Well, what do I mean by that? We all saw the horrific attacks on October 7th when Hamas conducted that really horrific raid in Israel. One of the things that happened in response is a hospital in Gaza was bombed. And within about a minute or two of that bombing, there were reports out that Israel had struck the hospital and killed 1,500 people. So I was suspicious of round numbers, by the way. So if within a minute of an attack, someone knew 1,500 people had been killed by a fighter jet, unless someone had counted those people and were standing there watching the jet, I'm not going to believe it. And I think most of us wouldn't either. But what happened is the New York Times picked it up and said, Israel hospital bombing kills 1,500 people. And many of you remember that lit up much of the Middle East. So there were attacks on embassies all around the world. There were a number of people killed, particularly in the Middle East, but also massive protests around Europe. And so whatever anyone thinks about that topic and what has happened since, the fact that being manipulated by misunderstanding into action and with real-world consequences is something that has happened from when I mentioned the Black Lives Matter protest in Texas all the way through, and it continues to happen around the world. And what it is doing is reshaping how Americans think of ourselves, of each other, and how other nations are thinking of our country. And so I see it happening across Latin America and in Africa and in the Middle East and the Gulf, where we are being redefined as who we are, as a people, as a nation, by folks who are really, really well, they're really good at the art of the narrative. And they're really good at the art of taking anything that has happened and shifting it in a direction that is anti-U.S. And I think that can be very dangerous for us as a nation. And what this digital interconnectivity has created, right, in addition to narrative intelligence and the fact that I can go through the toll road without stopping and having to pay my quarters, and all of this wonderful things that come from being able to take my phone and pay for things or take photos and connect, in addition to the world, the narrative, what is now happening in that digital connectivity, we're getting into the concept of a metaverse. Has anyone... so a metaverse really is a place where it's virtual and you're engaging with people in, you're some kind of a persona, right? So I might have an avatar that I think represents me. And 5 years ago would have said, oh, whatever. I mean, this sounds it's just not realistic enough. Well, the world is actually increasingly virtualizing. I don't know if that's actually a real word, but I'm going to make it one for tonight. And we're seeing the physical and digital world converge, and that really is driven by digital natives. And so that generation 0 to 43, right? So millennials, Gen Z, and now Gen Alpha. I didn't know there was a Gen Alpha until like 2 months ago, but it's 0 to 13. A lot of them are already on phones. A lot of them already on iPads and games and things like that. So in that digital native generation, it's about 5 to 7 hours a day online. And if you ask, more than half of digital natives will say their online, their digital life is as important or more important than the real world life they have, because that's where they can be themselves. And increasingly, and especially the younger you get, the Gen Z in particular, and a bit of the younger millennials, they will say that is actually their priority. And spending that time there is where they find their people. It's where they connect to game. It's where they connect to socialize. It's where they don't have to worry about the border. I mean, they're not thinking about, am I talking to Americans? They're thinking, am I talking to someone who loves Dota 2? It's a game I play. We have all these chat rooms. I've been playing with these guys for 10 years. I don't actually care who they are, but they get me. And we have all these conversations. And that is a trend that is accelerating quite quickly, because those generations aren't going to be satisfied without having that interconnectivity in all of their experiences. So we've seen the rise of commercial entities. So I think TikTok, right? 10 years ago, nothing. Now it's a multi-billion dollar. It's one of the. It's alternately the most valuable app there is, and run by the Chinese, and you'll see there was the vote in the House to ban it. We'll see what happens with that. But the underpinnings of it are, you're watching cat. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I don't have it because I can't do that, because it will also take all of your data off your phone. You see study after study that shows it's not just sitting on your phone, it's pulling in your contacts, it's seeing whatever else you do, it checks in every once in a while to see where you are. So to me, it's a surveillance app that's got 100 million people all around the United States using it, and that's not to mention where else in the world. So that's the reason for the ban. But it's virtual only, right? And so we're seeing companies that are virtual only, living in the metaverse or living in the online world, where they're making billions, many tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, and they don't actually have a physical footprint. And given that's where digital natives go, I think we're really in a place where if I'm a person who has a business with a storefront, I have to really look hard at this virtual world, because if I'm not there, I'm going to lose market share over time, and I'm going to have a hard time bringing in the younger generations, because that's where they live. I at least have to have a presence there. And so this is really looking at, understanding of the universe, baby boomers, a little less, and we're seeing here. So, how soon is this, how much time are we going to spend in the metaverse? So baby boomers would say, well, a little less than 2 hours. Gen X is 3.6, millennials is 4.7, and Gen Z agrees with them. I'm really glad we're not asking 13-year-olds yet, by the way, because it's not good. But it's expected to generate $5 trillion in revenue by 2030. That's not that far away. So positioning ourselves as a national security community, as communities, and then as businesses and academic institutions, we have to really look at how are we going to virtualize experiences so that those generations can be a part of what we're looking to do. And I think what this leads to is a bit of a fusion world. And I don't know if you can see this, but so we have the physical world, right, and the virtual world. And where it meets is there's this augmented reality and a virtual reality, and all of this is extended reality. So this is the kind of the connectivity of the both. And so we're in a position where we're probably a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 soon, where I can have an experience. I want to go talk to my family, and we all get our avatars together, and we show up in the same metaverse room, and we have a conversation in person virtually. That's existing in pilots all over now, but we're talking about communicating in a way that's entirely different, and we don't have to care about borders. I don't have to care if my son is in Cape Town and my other son may be in New York, and I could be in New Zealand, which is a goal. And it won't matter as long as we can figure out the time zones, because I don't think they're going to knock those down anytime soon. But this is really an opportunity for us to think about what, as a nation, when our national security institutions are built for the physical divide, right, between there's organizations that operate only in the foreign world. There are some that operate only domestically. And we have a lot of issues facing us that don't care about that. Climate change, cyber threats, terrorism, where that's even in the real world where there's that overlap. And now we're talking about the virtual world. Who's responsible for, getting U.S. messaging out in that? Who's responsible for making sure that someone's IP isn't taken, that maybe I own a clothing store or I own something, someone else takes my information and puts it in the metaverse, and they're actually making money from it. So there's the evolution of how we have to think of ourselves across so much of the economy and the government institutions really is profound. And I think that gets to me 3 thoughts, 2 questions, and then I'll maybe stop and ask for questions, because I realized I covered a lot lately very quickly. So it's transforming how people engage with each other. We've talked about this a little bit. I just did some research about 2 weeks ago, and there's a company that sells property in the metaverse. So I don't know what each of you have paid for your homes, but if you want to buy property in the metaverse, they've actually made $500 million last year selling property in one of the metaverses, because there's not just one. Well, how do you know? There's no property boundaries, right? So how do you actually know you have that property? Anyway, I get caught up in being an analyst in logic, and probably I need to get rid of that. But Snoop Dogg bought a neighborhood in one of the metaverses, and someone paid $500,000 to be his neighbor there. So I say all this to say, like, I can't believe it either, and it is where the world is going. And so we have to figure out how do we actually make that work. And once you have your metaverse property, by the way, you bought it, there are design build firms that will build your home in the metaverse, and it's $100,000 to $200,000 to build your metaverse home. I really wanted to be the Sotheby's of the metaverse, because I could help you put art in your virtual home, but my business partner said maybe we should stick to gaming, which seems like a good idea to me. But it's really the restructuring that we have to do to pivot to this. It's not only talking about how we think about the economy and finances and national security, but it's how we teach and how we learn. Because the younger generations learn differently than we did. Sitting in a class with 30 students, and there's a teacher up there, and there's either a chalkboard or a whiteboard or PowerPoint or whatever it was. Sorry for that. They live in a much more multidimensional world. And there's some tremendous opportunities for learning in that space. What I have discovered, and really the reason I pivoted to gaming, and I'll stick in a tangent here, is I think games teach. And they teach tactics or strategy or resource management and lots of other things, but not always on purpose. And so in building purposeful games where we're trying to teach skills that are really useful, but it's a great game. I mean, you're going to have fun, whether it's chasing aliens or trying to climb cliffs or whatever it is you're doing in the game, but underneath it all, learning. So critical thinking skills, being exposed to biases, understanding how people might be trying to manipulate you, and coming out of that feeling better. And that's all possible now with the technology, so it's not all bad. But we do have to figure out what are we going to do and how are we going to teach these students who they actually have a much more dynamic and interesting world online than they do in school. So how do we bring the two together in a way that allows them to learn at their full potential and perhaps prepares them for this world that's coming? I talked about the fourth industrial revolution and a transformation of global order, and I know that sounds like dramatic. It is dramatic, and we're seeing it happen everywhere. What we have seen, in particularly China, embrace these things that we're talking about. And in addition to all of the strategy they've laid out in their 10-year plans, you're seeing them step by step develop the foundation to be successful in this world. So from the IP theft that we're all aware of to the data breaches, that they're pulling in all this data that they may not be able to analyze yet, because some of it would be classified or it's encrypted. We come to a world where there's a quantum encryption, decryption capability, and then it's an entirely different world, and that's actually not that far away. So that comes back to your question, as what does open source really mean? So we've talked about how it's been defined, but in this world we're talking about, does the information have to be real, right? So is what's going on in the metaverse relevant to national security? Probably, because you're seeing so much. I mean, it's $5 trillion. That's a pretty significant part of a GDP anywhere. So we have to figure this out, and I think we're going to have to redefine it again. I don't know what that looks like, and maybe some of you do, so we can get there faster. And then I think all of that gets to redefining privacy and civil liberties. I think we've not all, probably not all, many of us have given up information we didn't realize we were giving up. And whether that's going through a toll booth or using my iPhone to pay for something, or even just having my wireless on in a hotel, or connecting into a hotel Wi-Fi. I mean, there's so many things that can happen where our data is no longer under our control. The younger generations say they don't care. They really don't care what is it you could possibly know about me that's important. I don't know the answer to that, but I think us being able to control our data is a fundamental thing that we all would believe in, and the ship may have sailed in many ways. And so, what do we do to protect people, especially children, right? And those that would otherwise be targeted? How do we do, and what kind of protections do we put in place? The banning TikTok thing is one way they've chosen to do it, but technology is moving so fast that by the time you get a bipartisan agreement to pass legislation, it takes so long. So I worry a lot about where we are. I worry a lot about what's coming, but I think the more that we can kind of understand this very, very new space and help our children and grandchildren navigate it, and asking them questions. The critical thinking skills, it's hard, it's really, really hard to stop when that flow of the narrative and all of your friends are on social media, yes, like. And whether that's, in its most harmless form, a pair of shoes, or in its most negative form, some of these really horrifically political and profoundly disturbing images. I mean, we really have to come to terms with how are we going to address it, because we're not moving fast enough. And I know we can. I mean, the American ingenuity is, once we get started, once we're in crisis, it's just amazing what happens. And I think we're in a spot now where, the Chinese are at war with us in particular. They'll say that. They have a plan for how they're going to become the global superpower, and they're executing it. I mean, this isn't actually even a secret. You can read about it online. Here's where we are, here's what we're looking to do, and they're doing it. And so in redefining the global order, we want to make sure that whatever it looks like, that it's still really taking care of us and our interests. And I think open source is a huge piece of that it isn't about secrets, but it's about the secrets that are out in the open. There's one company, and maybe I'll talk about this because it's relevant to shipping, which I have only learned about in being here about the port. So sorry, I have a lot of learning to do about Savannah. But if you have the systems on ships that are emitting, and you have people who, for piracy or other reasons, want to have that information, I mean, we really have to think about how do we defend space that we haven't thought about before, and even not just in those pirate-rich areas we think of in the Gulf and Horn of Africa, but elsewhere. So it can work for us, but I think we have to really, as a nation, as businesses, as states, really figure out what it is we want, and then what we're going to try to protect.
Thank you all for your great questions.
No, thank you.
And let's thank Kristin Wood again for a very insightful presentation. Thank you, Kristin.
So I really underestimated myself when I said I think I'm going to learn something tonight. And fantastic. We're so happy you came to Savannah. We hope to see you again. All be careful going home, and we'll see you here on April 25th. Thank you.